welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. We've got India, Nigeria, and folks tuning in from across the US. Very, very cool. So thank you everybody for being here today. Just very, very quickly for those that aren't familiar with us, we're here, myself, Ryan Robinson, wherever she is on your screen, as well as Amy, are here representing the Altimetric team. And Altimetric is a digital transformation company headquartered in Southfield, Michigan, with a global presence. So Amy is representing our India team. We have folks spread through the world and focus on digital transformation. So helping companies stay ahead of the curve with the ever-changing landscape of technology, and so what you all were just kind of talking about back and forth there, how do kind of these big legacy companies keep up with the more agile startups and just the younger companies up and coming that are, able to pivot and move a lot quicker and veer off to the right, like you mentioned, James. That really is what our company does. We help companies like Ford keep up with companies like Tesla and things of that nature in really simplified terms. Part of the reason that we're particularly excited to be hosting this conversation is because we have many of our team members are working on electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. So this touches our team. We're also here representing Detroit, where this conversation is really kind of pivotal to the economic development of the city and something that we are particularly keen on exploring. So I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker here today, Kurt Hinkley. So Kurt is an expert in this area since 2012. He's been working in the space. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kurt, I don't know if you were doing other things before that in this space, but he's both built an award-winning supplier to Tesla and co-founded Sigma West, an EV battery pack engineering and supply group in San Francisco with former Tesla executives. So he's here representing Tesla, as you can see from his hat. And he remains an active consultant in those efforts. So he really, really keeps his ear to the ground with the EV industry and all the emerging technology change. So we're really excited to kind of have him here and just tap his perspective. Him and I actually met in line at a music festival in Detroit. Called Mopop. So started talking. I was like, man, this guy really knows what he's talking about. We should collaborate. And like a year and a half later, here we are having this conversation. So we're very, very excited to have you here today. Kurt, how you doing?
That's fantastic. I'm doing well. Thank you. And I hope everyone else is doing well. And it's kind of an exciting time and for getting those vaccines rolled out. I know it's kind of this, we're right in that moment, right? And in that the Pfizer vaccine is made 10 minutes from my house. So it's kind of a neat community thing that we're a part of here to see it happen with people we know that are actually making that vaccine. So, here's to hoping this goes well and, we can be out of this by summer or soon after. So wild time, but so yeah, I wanted to compare to start with, and then we can get back to some of this other question. So the vaccine itself is oddly enough, it's a great way to compare to the EV industry. People think of Tesla as they're the only ones that are going to make it. They're the best. They're so far ahead. But just like these vaccines, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer or AstraZeneca, we need all of them to be able to get ahead of this. And so we need all of these companies that are going to play in the EVs, that are going to play in anything to do with climate change. We need all of these different pieces, and it isn't just one company. So it has that same feel of how are we going to do this together? So that was Elon's original thought, is let's get everyone involved because that's what it's going to take. So it gives an idea of it's not just one or the other. Now there will be some that fail, that don't make it, right? And it's just like in the early 19th century in that way. There's a lot of car companies and there's a lot of money being spent that we won't know until 5 years from now whether that was a good idea in certain areas. But so that gives an idea of where the whole market is. And that's from the raw materials, cobalt, lithium, all the way through to which vehicles, whether it be semi-trucks, pickup trucks, cars, charging stations, what types of batteries, that's all up for grabs, and it's happening so fast. And it's hard to keep our minds around. So when we look at smaller companies, say like I'll just name off some of them. I mean, Nikola's and Neos and Canoe, Fisker, Rivian, Lucid, etc. Which one of those are going to make it? I think it inside the industry, when you know who's running each company and what their market is, I think that there's a better idea of which ones have more, say, IP, or they have more industry knowledge, right? And so you get a better sense of which ones probably have a better chance because of who's running them. And I'll go back to Tesla for a moment. I mean, it's a small group of people still. Now it's growing very quickly now, but there's a small group of people that really knew what they were doing that migrated away from Tesla after their first 4 years. When after 4 years, their stock had, their options had come up. So a lot of them moved on. They were burned out. They really put their lives and their hearts into that company. But they went to all these other companies. They took a little time off, some of them. JV Straubel's doing something else now. The main battery enclosure guy that designed even the Model 3. He moved on to a company called Proterra Bus, designed a battery pack for them. But it goes in the VW. The VW plant in Chattanooga, and VW, that whole program is being run by an ex-Tesla employee. So they're everywhere. And so keeping in touch with them and understanding who's doing what really, really helps. Now, that's a different group than the OEM, the legacies, I should say. The legacy company is a totally different thing, right? And VW, Toyota, GM, Ford, Hyundai to a pretty good degree. Those guys are playing a different game, right? They have a lot of money. They already have a lot of good people. So
have any of those people that you mentioned, have any of them been sucked up by the big OEM?
Oh yeah. There's a constant cross-pollination going on there. So it's very small side note is in Michigan, we have very tight controls on confidentiality, non-competes. In California, it's much looser, and that's why they cross-pollinate so much more in all their industries. So there's this kind of interesting thing going on. That's why you see Tesla suing Rivian and that. But one of the guys that early on that left Tesla really helped GM to develop some of their program. It happens both ways though. There was just Tesla was just talking to me about someone they knew at a larger legacy company. They wanted to come work for them in a specific area and wanted to know what I thought. But it's just that back and forth. I think if it's a younger person in a legacy company, it's a great opportunity it's easier for them to pick up and go to one of these other smaller companies, get some stock, whatever, and then eventually move back, put that on their resume. And then they get an idea of the different way you have to think to work with these other companies, which is what GM and Ford and VW don't have. They're getting better at it. How quickly can they iterate? And it's massively different way of looking at things. So that cross-pollination is very important.
Yeah, and another just a really high-level question, Kurt, is kind of, given the state of affairs that you just described, what are you most excited about right now as it relates to kind of the near-term future of EV technology and maybe also for the long term?
Well, I think that I'll start with the long term because it goes to that solid state battery. And, so I guess that's probably, look at on the battery side. So when you look at a solid state battery, you've got there's a liquid electrolyte solution that regulates that flow. So that's going to create problems with overheating. You got to cool it. It could have some explosions. Those are all the things you hear about with lithium ion batteries, right? So getting better at in putting more energy density into those batteries is very important. But solid state is going to use a solid electrolyte to regulate that flow. So no fluids. So you can charge it 10 minutes instead of 40 minutes or 3 hours. You can pour a bunch of energy into it. The problem they've had in the past is that solid piece degrades very quickly. So you can't charge over and over again. So that's where all the attention's being spent. And they're getting there. Within 5 years, we'll see solid state, definitely not just from Toyota, but from QuantumScape here in the United States, been going at it for 10 years. They're invested by Bill Gates, JB Straubel, who was he's kind of the brains behind Tesla's batteries. He's moved on to Redwood Industries to do recycling now of batteries. Smart guy. And so a lot of good investment in that company. They just went public. They're worth like 25 billion. And even though the people that run it say they should only be worth 15, but that's exciting. You know, you look at the solid state is the holy grail, because we can put those batteries anywhere we want in the car. We don't have to cool them. Drives the cost down. Fast to charge. So that's exciting. And I think that's what you want to keep an eye on. All these other little incremental improvements in lithium ion are very important. Tesla has an idea of, and they are coming out with one that is a 4860, and then just geeky a little bit here, but the original cells you always see are 18650s, which are 18 millimeters in diameter by 65 millimeters high. That's where, and then they moved on to the 2170, which is the gigafactory. You know, LG Chem has moved on to that, et cetera. Those are 21 millimeters wide, 70 high, so they're fatter and they can hold more energy. But the new Tesla one is 4860, so it's 48 by 60. It's a canister. That's the one they've come out with in the next year or two, and they've been able to really drive down the cost and get the energy density up. That's what you're seeing on the lithium ion. One other side note for anybody who wants to know about batteries, the other way to do this, which is GM, which is Volkswagen, they're using pouch, which is basically it's a pouch cell, right? And those go into bigger boxes, if you will. And those boxes, if you will, go into a much bigger box. Totally different way of making it cheaper to get the plant up and running, not quite as energy dense, but they work. And I think GM's and LG have found a way to get even more energy density into those. So, you know, go back to the original question is okay, if you're Ford, which one do you get into? Do you get into the cylindricals? Do you get into the pouches? Do you wait for the solid state? That's just the battery side, but that's what drives, the battery is what drives this. Another way to put it is, you know, a good friend of mine that worked at GM works at another software startup in San Francisco now, but he said, you know, GM doesn't make cars, they make engines, and they just happen to put things around it that make a car. And I think, you know, Ford's in the same boat, right? And so that's what they're really, really good at. So if you look at the battery pack itself, or the batteries themselves, that's the key to all of this, because everything else is about the connectivity. It's about the autonomy side of it. And it's about sharing those vehicles. So it's mobility as a service, not a car anymore. And the way we've always looked at it. So that's exciting long-term. That's really where it's going. You have to have all those pieces in place, and we're getting them there. In the short term, I mean, what's exciting is, you know, by 2022, there's so many companies that are coming out with so many vehicles that you can't help but be excited. You have Volkswagen coming out already with their ID4s, so coming here in the United States, ID3, their little minibus, which is going to be fun. All the GM cars, all the, you know, the Ford Mustang Mach-E that came out like this week, it's being delivered, right? So all of these different vehicles and semis and trucks, pickup trucks, it's just like it's like Christmas morning, you know. It's just there's so many cars.
Like a mass adoption going on somewhere.
Yeah, it's just so much fun.
And I can imagine, you know, given your the time you've been in the industry, it's presumably changed even quite a bit. And Perry noted in the chat here that, you know, there's been kind of multiple different times throughout history where electric cars have kind of picked up some traction, but ultimately, you know, didn't pan out. I saw Who Killed the Electric Car, I think, like last year. You know, interesting stuff. I guess I'm curious, like, you're fully confident that this is here to stay? This isn't just another flash in the pan trend going on here?
Well, you know, it would have been, right? I think, except for there's really two key drivers in the last 5 years. And those key drivers were Elon. He put all of his money on the line. I mean, when we were working with them back then, there were a couple of times we didn't ship. Later on, we found out it was because they were out of money, right? I mean, he put all of his money into SpaceX and this, and if it didn't work, that one launch didn't work at SpaceX, he was done. So that, knowing the people that made a difference at Tesla and stuck with it, that whole trajectory changed because of Elon and his group, not just him, but everybody there. The other part was the Dieselgate. You know, James, talk about that. It's one thing to have Tesla do this and be a niche player, and everybody's like, that's really cool. But when you have the largest company in the world, I mean, the Toyota and them are go back and forth at that time. But when they did that and had that Dieselgate, that changed everything. That really was at the exact moment you'd want that to happen. You really wanted to have something like that happen. Those two things really changed it. So that because Volkswagen then went all in, everybody else really had to start paying attention. And then to kind of fast forward to the last couple of years, the money, really at the end of the day, the money, institutional money and investment money started flowing. And that really juiced all of the system. And then lastly, I guess I'll say is the beginning of this year with the pandemic, a ton of people sitting at home with all that extra liquidity. That's why you're seeing these IPO SPACs come out. People are looking, they're a great way to get some return pretty quickly. They're a little, you get a little careful. They're looking at future earnings 3, 4, 5 years down the road and discounting them. So, but I don't think anybody cares right now. It's just a stock price. So yeah, it's here to stay. And knowing, look at GM's all in, they're not going to have any more internal combustion engines. Volkswagen is not developing anymore. Daimler's not developing any more internal combustion engines. They're just done.
Wow.
So they're just
when you say not developing any more internal combustion engines, you mean they're going to be all electric?
Yeah. So whatever's been developed through last year, those are still working their way through the pipeline and can be used. But everybody, anything else past that, they're not developing.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's really cool. So I guess both James and Amy are both asking some great questions about the charging side of the equation. So you mentioned that batteries are integral, but also there's the whole network of charging stations and just like the adoption. I've never heard this term. You said range anxiety, James. That's great. So I guess, and James specifically asked, are there any legacy car companies investing in a Tesla-like supercharged network? So could you kind of just speak at a high level to what do you see on the horizon of how do we kind of spur mass adoption of the charging network? How do we roll that out?
Yeah, so if we're talking about just charging batteries, I think there's other types of like hydrogen cell, or to get hydrogen from, or renewable natural gas. That's a different topic. But there was a Charge America, I believe it's called, for VW. Part of their settlement was they have to put in a charging system across the United States. They're doing that right now.
Sorry, Kurt. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to get a little bit more specific because this is something I truly wonder about. Right, like when I go on a road trip with my Tesla and I drive from Houston to Dallas, which is a 4-hour drive, et cetera, that type of thing, I can either stop for 2 15-minute charges or one kind of 45-minute charge the way I want to do it. But if I was in any other electric vehicle, because of the Tesla supercharger, the way that they are vertically integrated, where they're, the connector, that the way the car is going to charge, my understanding is if I was in a Ford or a Nissan EV, I would be charging at the equivalent of what a dryer outlet is like, right? So that same 4-hour trip wouldn't be adding on 30 minutes of charge time. I might be adding on an hour and a half or more of charge time, which to me seems like a significant barrier for legacy car companies to be able to push adoption. So like, are any of those legacy car companies not just investing in an infrastructure through third parties, but investing in some way where they can get to a point where I can say, hey, this reasonable drive that I would do as a day trip in my internal combustion engine can still be a reasonable day trip in my EV?
Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question, I suppose. I mean, Tesla, we knew early on when they wanted to do their own charging network that they definitely had, that was going to be one of their aces in the hole, right? Because no one else was even thinking about doing that. That was going to give them that leg up like you're talking about. I think the VW settlement and having them put that infrastructure around the country, but you're right, it's not as good yet as the fast charging. However, part of that has to do with what's on the car, how much can it receive at a time, and so a lot of those, from my understanding, a lot of those charging networks can be changed over time to effectively put more energy out at the same time. But your battery packs can't handle that much energy at once. So for example, I mean, even little things like Tesla right now, when they know you probably know this, James, when you go up to a supercharger, they're going to warm up your battery pack to get it ready, right? Okay, so all those little, so that it can charge more quickly, right? You can already get a running start. So as far as other companies doing it, no, they're gonna line up with I think these other types of systems we put in place. Now, if we look at it from kind of like first principles, where do we want to be in 5 years? We want to have charging stations at your house, downtown, everywhere. And I think the batteries will be different too. So let's look out 5 years, then kind of work our way back. You know, it's kind of like with Biden coming in, he's really wants to put a lot of money into this infrastructure. So we don't think about it from a Tesla perspective, but we look at it from where are all the ways we can put a system in place. Then we can get there in 5 years, which at maybe 3 years, whatever it might be. But we can get there. It'll just look different than the way Tesla did it, which is more of a we build it and then they'll come sort of thing. And you know, frankly, most companies aren't going to start producing any volume until 2022. Really, you know, on the legacy. I mean, the bigger volumes. We've got some time. It is a problem. There's no question. It's one of Tesla's main selling points. Yeah, I mean, there's no way around that. So we'll see how that plays itself out. But that's part of the adoption problem. Yeah. So good
very
question.
Interesting. Amy, you dropped that note in here. I see. You want to chime in right now? Is it relevant to what you just mentioned?
Yeah, yeah, I would like to share some insights that I gained from my past 2 years research on EV market for globe as well as for India. So basically, I've been working on a digital product, which is my personal product. So I'm making a universal digital charging infrastructure network for Indian EV market. So far India, if we look at the total share or the percentage of India for global EV market is just 1. And there is I've been interacting with government officials, I've been interacting with European companies, EBTC, some mass production companies like Tata Mahindra. So the problem here in India is and not the problem here in India itself, but most of Asian countries. See, China, they have manufacturing setup and the technology advancement, so they can push in the quantities. But the thing is, everyone is looking here to be as a Tesla, but no one is looking looking deeply into the what other factors are actually helping this electric vehicle mobility to actually get that drive, like charging infrastructure or the technology of, because see, I can share you some insights. I've been talking and I did a city survey here in India. I did the city survey, traffic survey for Pune, Bombay and Delhi. So Bombay and Pune is one of their hyperloop locations. Okay. So I try to track my users' footprints. So those who are owning, an electric vehicles. And yeah, again, I guess someone have mentioned the range anxiety. So it's not the India, but most in the other countries as well. The range anxiety was a first step back for an owner or the potential owner who is willing to switch to electric. So I did a survey on that. So the finding I got is even in India, for a Tesla putting up an 25 or 70 kilowatt charging station, it's like a supercharger who is drawing the 70 kilowatt or 22 kilowatt of power from that grid for that 15-20 minutes. Okay. And you have the very strong setup over there in the US or in the European countries. Even if you say the Norway is actually, they have turned fully electric by, I guess, last year or this year, they are turning into. Even Sweden is already on the way. But here in India, the case is happening is we don't have that strong grid that can pull up 20 or 25 kilowatt of power for 15-20. And if it happens, it might draw here in my area. I'm saying I did a location survey and I proposed to my smart city officials. So they've been planning for the metro line. So we were at that time we were planning out to do a small type of commercial prototype. So we have some startup over here, electric startups, and there are also charging manufacturers are also coming up into Indian market. So the thing is we don't have that much of grid backup. So even if I put up a 22 kilowatt of charger and someone come up with we have standard model here in India is Mahindra Reva. It's a four-wheeler which has the range of 140 kilometer. Okay, it's a four-wheeler and it's having a range of 140 kilometers. So for that, and they have the battery pack of around 13 kilowatt or something. I'm not sure about their latest model, but 13 or 17 kilowatt. So if even I managed to pull out around 70 kilowatt of power from that grid for 15 or 20 minutes, the possibility that I might draw the complete electricity those who are dependent on the other side of areas.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem in India you have, from what I understand, when you have, distributed power is going to be an important thing down the road, right? To have.
One other thing is like I've been talking with Tata Motors. So Tata Power is coming up because here in India we have like if you look at it, our geographical location. So we have sunlight for almost 300 days per year.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've been planning out for the solar electric charging station for the highways, but again, to generate that energy and to manage the energy, because again it's even if we look at the other options like battery swapping and all, it's like it's still out of sight scenario here in India.
It's and one of the things that would be nice is if you can connect with me on LinkedIn and send me some of these questions too, and we can keep in touch that way.
Actually, I have sent you the invitation.
And I think, when you look at Tesla, Elon was saying wants to be in India next year. He's promised it, right? So you think not only the vehicles, but he's big on the storage side. I think the storage with the distributed energy with solar is going to be the solution to that. I think in India, I don't see a better solution because of the disruptions to the power that you have. It's going to have to be something like that gives you continuous power in each area.
A few years ago, I saw a case study on Enron in Mumbai. And, Enron built a big nuclear power plant outside of Mumbai and supplied power at kind of the rate that Americans are used to paying for electric power. And the power they provided was much more expensive than what the Indian power companies were producing, but also much more reliable. So they built kind of a Western style power plant there that didn't really meet the needs of India, and it went bankrupt, as part of the Enron bankruptcy, and so this was coming to mind as you were talking, that we may be making assumptions about the electric power in India, which are different, which are
even our Indian electric policy, don't allow us to trade our electricity which we are getting from the grid to the consumer. The amendment of act is still going on, but that is also one of the hurdle that are coming up to deploy the electric charging station. Because here in India, what is happening is we have the limitations on the number of vehicles. So even if I put up any charging station, I have like around 4, or most of time I would have the ideal time for the charging station. And even if I manage to pull out around 22 kilowatt like a fast DC charger, so that like 15-20 minutes of charging might withdraw the energy from like the other 4 areas. So here, and again, and even if you look at the battery swapping, so I've been on the government conference. At that time, Indian government, the story is like back in 2018 or 2019, just a year back. So Indian government was planning out, they've been in contact with the Korean company. So we currently Indian government is looking out to, pushing the adoption of EVs into the public domain. So why public domain? Because they have the constant mobility. Okay, number of cycles. Because see, even if you look at the, let's consider like your electric car as a mobile battery, or it's a mobile device, it's a big size mobile device. Okay, so how we get our mobile battery drains out, like it completely depends on the uses of that battery or uses of the mobile. It same goes with the public mobility, because they have this continuous loop of traveling. So that's why they need a continuous cycle of charge. But if you look
Yeah.
at the private owner, so you don't know, like even as a private owner. So I guess we have one Tesla owner in our list. So even if we track his footprint, so from home to office during the week, how many times he travel, how many kilometers he travel, and within a single day, because he owns a Tesla. Because once he charge, I guess he's like months traveling might be enough if we consider only the loop of home and office. The same goes here in Indian scenarios, like that is also happening. Like we have electric owners, but again the public location we are not sure about it. There are locations, like currently India holds around network of around 3,000 charging stations across the country. But the thing is, it's like a very very unpuzzled scenario here in India. There are the electric actual owners, those who are holding up the electric vehicles, then they are actually looking out for the location and the type of charging network, so type of community they are looking for. And here is government is trying in some other way, or might be they have been miserably failed to actually promote their policies and reach out to actual consumers. And there is the third player which is coming and playing a part is the
If I could I
yeah.
interrupt this for a second? I think because there's so many big buckets of each one of in this EV area, I think if we could set up another meetup, because we were talking about doing multiple meetups, I think, and then break it down into, say, the charging side, right? Because then I think you could really bring a lot more to that conversation. Like, and we can look at Europe here, and you can, because I think if we just focus on that, because that's each one of these areas, whether it's batteries or cars, right? Each one is so monstrous, and I think it's when people try to, not you, but when people try to say what's the state of, there was a consultant group that wanted me to talk to them this week, and they said, okay, well, tell me from metals to the end of the pack, and I'm thinking, you mean everything, like pulling cobalt out of the ground all the way through, and and they wanted to put it in 3 slides, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. It's simple. It's a battery and it's a battery pack. I get that, or it's charging or whatever, but there's so many pieces that go so deep, right? So if you can reach out to Altimetric and say, hey, let's set up a meetup, and then we can do all of that once, okay? Because I think that's that would be a really cool way to go.
Let's just as we go here, if y'all want to kind of drop, so charging technology sounds like a big one. If everyone could kind of drop, are there specific aspects of this conversation that you'd love to deep dive into? Obviously, we're operating just with the limited lunch hour and have about 10 more minutes, but that's fantastic. I mean, I think that that could be a really interesting session to dive into.
Sessions. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's so much change going on, and that's leadership's about coping with change, and that's what's going on right now, and that's where the opportunity is. Without change, there's no opportunity, which means there's a lot of opportunity right now, and whichever piece of this puzzle you want to play in. And I'm a big believer that if we want to, for those of us that aren't working at the big companies, if we can stay above commodity, but we can stay below IP, because IP's intellectual properties, that's for a lot of the bigger companies, unless you're just that brilliant, right? But there's a lot of middle space there that's off the radar in all of these systems. And for those of us that aren't the IP geniuses, or we aren't wanting to do the commodities, because that's a whole different group of people and companies, there's room in the middle to make so much money, right? It's so much opportunity in the middle of each one of these silos. And that's where people need to look. And that's where the conversations can really get interesting, I think. So
great. I wanted to, James asked a great question before he hopped off, and I wanted to dive into it quickly, because this is one that I'm really curious about. He asked specifically, are any of the legacy car companies investing in the idea of continuous delivery of updates similar to Tesla? And I guess, Kurt, I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to that concept of like the car being a piece of software that can be updated. How does that interplay with kind of the future of EVs?
Yeah, I think it's a necessary part of it. My understanding is that all of them will be using over-the-air updates. I may be wrong on that, and Pierre, I don't know if someone else has a thought on that, but I know, for example, was it Volkswagen, I think, had to bring back a lot of their ID3s to actually do a software update in-house, but they said after that it was just something weird, but then everything else would be over the air. It has to be over the air updates, and that is a big part of this whole move. So I would expect every single company to have that exact same approach. it's just normal anymore. It's just like your phone, or well, it is a phone, right? It's a computer. So they can do it just like they can with their phone and computer. So that's going to be, that is standard as far as I'm concerned. And so yeah, it changes. You get used to the idea. I've been around it so long, but it's wild, right? But if we think of it as basically a battery with a computer with wheels, I mean, it's kind of what it is. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess Amy got me thinking about kind of the global market, but I know the US based companies have such a big impact, the OEMs and everything on the global market as well. I guess I'm curious, Kurt, if you could specifically dive into, we had the electoral college, met yesterday, and we've got a new president coming in, shortly, and I'm curious just kind of how you see the change of administration affecting kind of the near term industry from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, so the policy with Biden saying is there's a lot of movement he wants to make in this field across the board, from making sure we have to keep the jobs here, the technology here, invest in the infrastructure for charging, et cetera, all the way through. He's saying all the right things, and I would imagine he's going to do all those right things, but it has a big caveat, which is it depends what happens in Georgia on January 5th. And that depends on how much he can actually do in the grander scheme of things. However, there's a whole list of things that his administration can do without Senate approval. It's, for example, the fleet of federal government vehicles can be electrified, or school buses, or there's all sorts of pieces that they can work on without having to go down this path of say, like having the $7,500 reinstated for Teslas and GMs, because they've sold so many vehicles, they don't get the $7,500 rebate anymore. That only went to 200,000 cars. So, so reinstating some of that's going to take a Senate type approval. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm done.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just going to kind of as a follow up, like from a kind of breaking past the gridlock standpoint. You mentioned that if the OEMs aren't even producing diesel engines, combustion engines at some point here in the near future, how does that start to, do you foresee a decoupling of electric vehicles from the environmental movement and just kind of becoming synonymous with the auto industry in a way that would reduce the gridlock, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I read an article this morning. The EVs, it was climate change, and then it went into affordability. So it kind of moved in away from the climate change, which is great. It's still there. It's a part of the DNA. But then it moved into affordability. But the article was saying, okay, let's move away from affordability into, basically what you're saying is usability, making it a normal thing, and making it so that people know electric vehicles as well as they know the kind of vehicles we drive now. So it's kind of, to answer your question, it becomes the same. It changes, but it stays the same industry. And the more we can make that happen, the more it's going to be adopted. Versus if there's so many people that, it's kind of they call it like a light green or dark green view on how you see the climate. Some people just want to make their own decisions and recycle. Some people are thinking more like regulation changes. And so there's sort of a sliding scale of green there. So when you apply that to this field, then it seems like the best way to go is to make electric vehicles the same in people's minds as the internal combustion engine vehicles. So I think it'll feel in a lot of ways the same way. The manufacturing side will feel different, of course. But you look at 2025 and beyond, a lot of people believe, and I kind of lean that way, after 2025, it's hard to imagine buying a brand new vehicle with an internal combustion engine, and certainly 2030, because where's that used vehicle going to sell into? Who's going to want that when it's cheaper to run? It's a better car to be an electric vehicle. So if it's cheaper and better, then why go get an ICE engine vehicle that is going to depreciate much more quickly? Because there's going to be
because it doesn't go vroom.
Yeah, well, I agree. They should put that sound. My son's like that, so, but he also likes the speed, the speed of it. But But I think that there will be a scale that happens over time. I
But
think
the
it's
electric vehicle may not really be cheaper. We don't know yet. Right now, it's more expensive.
it is.
We're hoping that economies of scale will bring the price down, but it's got a very complex resources network. The basic commodities that go into building it are things that aren't produced at these kinds of volumes, and there are potential problems. For example, cobalt and in the Congo, and all the social problems that are caused by mining cobalt. Whether these can be overcome or not still isn't proven, which means for the investors it's a risky investment, right? There is some risk.
Yes.
And one of the arguments that's made is that the electric vehicle is simpler to manufacture, therefore it will be cheaper. But manufacturing keeps getting better at making more complex things. So I think of the new Explorer transmission. It has 10 speeds. Can you imagine that? An automatic transmission with 10 speeds, but it's no more expensive than the transmissions that they made 20 years ago with only 4 speeds. So, and this is because, robots are used to make them, and computer aided design is improved. And, there are a lot of other kinds of advancements that are going on at the same time.
Yeah, Barry, you're right. You're spot on. I read yesterday that there was the first vehicle using 3D printed parts is being made by, I think, GM, one of their niche vehicles. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, that's right. They had that rear tailgate or something.
Yeah, it's wild. So, and then you have like Rival, which comes out of the UK. They're a bus manufacturer. They're doing micro factories around the world. So, and that's a different way of looking at it too. That's partly microfactory based, but partly, obviously they're EV. And you're spot on though. I think Matt Bolson, if you read him, keep up with him, he's really great about kind of every month saying, here's what's going on around the world in EVs. Now he's more focused on cobalt and lithium, and he's saying, okay, well, there's 55 times more lithium we'll need by the end of the decade, and how are we going to do that? But he also really stays focused with other people, giving them information on how the EV companies are doing. So he's a great one to keep in touch with. And that's once a month through Seeking Alpha.
Because I've felt with lithium, for example, that, one of the issues is how pure it needs to be. Mm-hmm. So if it needs to be very pure, then you've got to go to those evaporite basins in Bolivia. But if it doesn't need to be so pure, then Elon's approach of buying lithium clays in Nevada might work out pretty well.
Yeah.
And nobody really knows. And then there's still people pushing a non-lithium technology, silicon, which has a lower power density, but is more available. So in a way, the battery chemistry hasn't really been decided yet.
I agree. I think when we look at solid state may get us out of a lot of that, depending on what that connector is, right? So I think, and then if you look at 2016, the kilowatt hour cost was $293 per kilowatt hour for a pack.
Yeah.
2019, $156. We know that Tesla's probably under 100, GM's gonna be under 100, and Tesla in a couple of years will be probably around 60, 70. If they can do that, and again, going to your point about cobalt, lithium, et cetera, then that's great. But the problem is if there's not enough lithium and cobalt, the price goes way up, for not even considering the impact on the environment, and considering even more importantly, I suppose, the impact on the people in the Congo, for example. So there's a lot of things to figure out yet, no question.
Yeah. Well, one thing is recycling. And so these can be recycled once there's enough in the system. But, so some people are looking at an approach of using buses and heavy vehicles as a place to start. And then you get the whole system working with vehicles where there's obviously an advantage for the electric drive.
No, absolutely. And I think that, J.B. Straubel, I mentioned earlier, is from Tesla, one of the co-founders. He was the guy in charge of all the battery stuff, technology, and really set up the Gigafactory. His group, Redwood Industries, is that's what it's for, right? Is for recycling. And I think that he's ahead of that curve, and he knows that's the way it's going to have to go. And Europe is considering in the last week that they may put in regulations that all the batteries there have to be green. which includes the recycling side, which includes health companies like Northvolt, which is in Sweden, which is made from hydropower, and those are 2X Tesla executives I know pretty well, so they're pretty excited about that regulation going through, you know. So.
And well, here we are right now, just using a green technology instead of going downtown, driving downtown, and having a meeting. We're using Zoom, right?
Yes.
All on purpose. We thought about that in
Actually, I like those meetings downtown, but
well, good. We are keeping the space in the near future, so we hopefully be getting back to all of that soon, and hopefully, if the brilliant folks like Kurt and Amy are doing their job, we won't have to worry about parking anymore, because we'll just be able to use some sort of autonomous ride share that'll bring us down. Fantastic. But so you know, we're sandwiched here in the lunch hour, so I want to be respectful to everyone's day. But as we mentioned, you know, this is fantastic. So this was the exact conversation we were looking to have. Thank you so much, Kurt, for sharing your insight, and for everybody, Perry and Mark and Zubike, everybody, Amy, for sharing all the awesome insights. This was exactly kind of what we were hoping to, the type of energy we were hoping to create here. Let's definitely keep this going. Let's do another conversation soon, and dive kind of deeper into some of these other areas that we mentioned that we weren't able to get into maybe as much detail as we wanted. That's fantastic. So I think in the new year, we can just get another session booked here and just kind of keep the conversation going, if that
sounds wonderful. Yeah, let's keep in touch, and anybody wants to connect, I think you can just find me on LinkedIn, or Jacob and Ryan can send you my contact info, and let's keep the conversation going. A lot of areas from autonomous to connectivity, electrification, sharing, and then a lot of that ties into your group at Altimetric, I think. So let's keep this going. So thank you so much for having me today.
If you're an engineer who's interested in working in do definitely let us know, because our company is helping Ford grow that side of their business, and perhaps there's a role for you in that mix. So definitely also think about that. I just re-dropped Kurt's LinkedIn info in the chat here, as well as a reminder to check out our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe for updates, but we will be processing and posting this video in the near future, so definitely check that out as well, and we'll be sending that via email as well. So yeah, with that, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you, everybody, for your insights, and we will be in touch very soon.
Okay.
In Houston, I'm a Tesla Model 3 owner, you know, general Tesla enthusiast, but was thinking about it in a conversation with a neighbor about the future of electric vehicles. And, you know, Tesla has a niche certainly there, but wanted to expand my knowledge of where we feel like EVs are going that are outside of the world that I pay a ton of attention to. So that's my goal for joining, is to just kind of increase my knowledge of the general market and less around one specific manufacturer.
Sure.
Very, very cool.
James, have you, how long have you had the Model 3?
I've had it since 2018. So it's funny, I had a coworker that was on the waiting list for 2 years. And then I actually had an Audi diesel that was caught up in the Dieselgate scandal, et cetera, that type of thing. And so 2018 was when the US was still offering the maximum federal tax rebate. And I got a check from Audi for their fraudulent view in the market. And so I had this fairly big chunk of equity saying, hey, I'll never have as much opportunity. And so I went and put down, and I got mine in 4 weeks, but my coworker that was on a 2-year waiting list, we got ours within a week of each other. So he was super frustrated that, but yeah, I've had it since 2018 and generally love it.
Fantastic. Just a little bit of a backstory there is that where I worked for 8 years, and I'm no longer with them on a day-to-day basis, but we produced a lot of the parts for the Model S and the Model X battery pack, and then some of the Model 3. So we were early on working on some of their new designs to get that into the Gigafactory. So visited the Gigafactory in Nevada a couple times when it was being put up. Super secret, you know, and nobody wanted to show anything, but it's a great place. They're a great company. Worked with them, still have a lot of good friends that were there and still are there. So it's a really good company. Yeah. Cool. That's why I see they got the hat. So you'd like that, right? But the Model 3 is great. The Model Y's really fantastic too. So interesting to see what they come out with the Cybertruck and the Semi. We did some work on the Semi prototype stuff too. So yeah, they're a solid company at this point. A little bit probably overpriced on stock, but that happens.
It's not a bad thing necessarily.
No, there's so much liquidity in this market now because of COVID in particular. I think it's like 38% more M1 or M2 money in the market. So it's got to go somewhere. It's real estate. It's these types of companies. So it's some gold. Where does all that money has to go somewhere?
I think it's actually to the credit of the financial markets that they're able to sustain this with Tesla, because to make it work, it's a long-term investment. And usually they're criticized for only making short-term investments.
Yes. Yeah, it really turned that. I agree. And that's been a really good thing. It's kind of a silver lining to this whole pandemic side and where some of that investment's coming from through, we can talk later as well, but the Robinhood app. So a lot of people who can just invest from the millennial group through Robinhood are really driving the price on the Tesla, also like the next group of Teslas, if you will.
Yeah.
And
but I get the feeling that there's other money there. I think Warren Buffett is interested, and there may also be sovereign funds investing in Tesla.
Yeah, well, I think it's about time Warren got on that boat. He invested a lot in BYD over in China, and they're now in Southern California, right? So he's very much invested there, which is for tech. He's not a real tech investor that way. And I know the Saudi Arabian group invested in Lucid. I think they're the majority owner. It's hard to tell how much those groups have put into Tesla, right? Because they're so big now in terms of market capitalization. It's hard to figure out who owns what to a degree.
Yeah, you can't. I think it's very difficult to tell who's really behind the investment, but you can see that somebody's dedicated to it.
Yes.
Somebody with enough capital is dedicated to it.
And it's being included in the S&P, and then the way that the institutional investors had to redo their allocations to account for that inclusion in the S&P really also drove and has been giving it support on the Tesla side.
One of the things that interests me with Tesla is that while most of the auto industry is going to a global horizontally integrated structure, they're looking at vertical integration. And I think that's a significant, in the long run, is a significant profit generator.
It is, and as James, in terms of your Tesla file, if we'll call you that, but the Model Y and the putting in that high pressure die casting line to replace 100 and some parts in the back seat area, right? Those types of things, and I know there's some other things I can't speak about, but there are other things they're doing that are more vertically integrated. Elon, from early on, I mean, we wanted to get away from the horizontal supply chain. He's not a big supplier person. I've met him. We won an award. I got to shake his hand and stand next to him. He's very tall. But his whole plan was to it's kind of the first principles, own everything from the metal out of the earth all the way through kind of the well to wheel idea. And he's all about that. Where you look at these other companies, and Ford's included, and one of the things that I'd like to do today, the approach is take it from a Ford-centric perspective, simply because there's a lot of people from Ford that I think are part of your group here. And it's a nice launch off into whichever way we want to go in terms of batteries, other suppliers, other customers.
Yeah.
But you look at Ford has a very different approach right now in terms of how they're looking at it. GM, I like to do the Ford GM comparison in that it's not the new OEMs like Tesla, but the GM is making an operating system, and they're going to control the batteries all the way through, right? The Ultium battery, they're working with LG Chem. It's a pouch battery. I worked with them a couple of years ago, and over the many years on developing some of the extrusions that go into that. They've done a lot of work there, and that's their approach. Ford's gone to hey, let's align with other other companies approach. And you see that everywhere in the world right now. Who can line up best with other companies and leverage what they have? It's sort of that musical chairs. When the music stops, you don't want to not have a chair, right? So that's what.
Kurt, I'm very interested in this because when I step back, and I come from the software industry, right? So a lot of this I find analogous to how people are looking to deliver software. I had a family member that was on contract with Jaguar Land Rover in Birmingham, and so he was kind of janitorial services almost, if you will. But he said every meeting he walked into, Tesla was about in every other sentence, right? So it is pervasive on mine. And I read an article a year or so ago that really hit me when it talked about just before you get into parts, before you get into battery technology, et cetera, just the strategy of how these companies are looking to deploy. And traditional car manufacturers are still manufacturing cars the way they've always done, right? They have this huge supply chain network. And when Bosch goes and builds a brake pad, they're building it for 7 or 8 different car manufacturers, and whomever is building a swing arm axle, et cetera, that type of thing. And so, and each one of those things, as software becomes more and more pervasive, has its own piece of software that has to communicate back to the central operating system, et cetera, that type of thing. So it's this very federated way to manage and to be able to achieve the velocity of innovation that you're seeing now come out with Tesla. And I think some of these startups like Rivian, et cetera, are on the same way, where, you know, the analogy there was more of an octopus, right? An octopus has these 8 different arms and legs, but it's all got a central nervous system managed by 3 different hearts, et cetera. And that's how Tesla designs its cars. Like, it owns the entire experience. And so it can control with one software update, an update to how the brake calipers work in a tight turn, et cetera. And so if you're Ford or Jaguar or any of these other companies, how do you compete in a world where, you know, you're going down left field here and somebody else has made a hard turn right before you get into individual technology updates?
Yeah, you know, James, you hit on it beautifully there, because it's, I'm gonna take a step back and say, before you joined, I was just saying to Ryan and Jacob that this morning I woke up and I thought, okay, what happened last night? And because it's such a East Coast, West Coast, Europe, China, sort of Asian, Korean thing, there are 12 new articles out this morning that are all extremely relevant. Whether it be, of course, the Mustang Mach-E's coming out, Amazon unveiled an autonomous EV. So they bought Zoox, and so they revealed that in the last day. Baidu, it's kind of like the Google of China. They're looking to make their own EV. Toyota, huge news, decided to let us know that they are working on a solid state battery, which they'll have a prototype this coming year. They were heavily focused on the hydrogen fuel cell, but that solid state, we can talk about if we have time, is really the holy grail of batteries. And I'm sure Tesla has one in the background they're working on, but I'm sure they do. But Chinese, the NIO company raised 2.7 billion. Tesla just shut down their S and X line over Christmas for 2 weeks. One can presume what's going to come out of that later. And it just keeps going. You know, there's so much that happens in 24 hours. So that ties into what your question is. When we said take a Ford, I like the Ford-centric view because they're kind of in the middle. They're not GM saying, hey, we're going to make everything our own because they're big enough. But a McKinsey report came out and said there needs to be about 500,000 vehicles a year for a company to have it make sense to put the CapEx into having their own battery manufacturing and all the other pieces of the puzzle that you're talking about. That's when do you pull that trigger? And I think Ford definitely is waiting to pull that trigger. What's the true uptake on the electric vehicle side? And it takes so long to put those factories into place. Do you wait to see if there's another technology coming along? Ford's straddling that, and their way to look at it is twofold. One, they're going to play the icon view of they're going to do the Mustang, the F-150, and in the van, whatever. They're going to use their icons, and they're going to buy everything that goes into it because they were a little bit behind to start with. The other part is they're going to align themselves with other big companies like Volkswagen. So Volkswagen will give them their MEB platform in Europe, and I know that platform very well. So that should work well for them. VW then invested a bunch of money into Argo AI, which is their AV part for Ford. So you've got those types of tie-ups. There's news reports over time of Ford and Volkswagen eventually merging. I mean, that's the crazy thing. But
oh, wow.
They are definitely really aligned in what they're doing. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that tie-up.